Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Pearson Center. This is our second webinar talking about re-entering life after or during COVID. We've had some wonderful sessions so far, and we're delighted that we have many coming on board to listen to our second webinar. And we've got some terrific guests as well who are going to speak and give us some of their advice and then some of their insight. Let me introduce those to you now. We have Jan Westcott, who's President and CEO of Spirits Canada, representing companies who make all those great things we drink, all kinds of whiskeys, rum, and gins. Frank Bayliss is joining us. Frank is the Executive Chairman of Bayliss Medical, a company that develops medical devices that's used predominantly in cardiac and spinal procedures. He was also a former MP, we're delighted to say. Welcome, Frank. Jerry Diaz is joining us, and he is, most of us will know, the National President of Unifor, and that represents the largest private sector union in the country, everything from auto workers to frontline workers, and really he has been on the front line every day during this pandemic. We're delighted to welcome Ali Ahasi. Ali is a member of Parliament for Willowdale, and we're delighted that he's joining us as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Technology. And to round out this august group, we have our moderator, Heather Schofield, who will be very familiar to many of us who follow the economy, especially as it's written. She is with the Toronto Star, and prior to that had senior roles with CP, the Canadian Press, and the Globe and Mail. Welcome, Heather, and I'm turning this over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me. I am quite looking forward to this discussion because obviously some of the miracles that we've seen in manufacturing have been front and center, and it really has seemed like a miracle, the speed at which some of the manufacturers have turned their attention and the workforces have completely readjusted to handling the pandemic. And so I'm quite looking forward to hearing some of these stories. I think last week, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce working together with Statistics Canada showed that something like 12% of manufacturers had switched their production over to providing materials to fight the pandemic. And I think the government has said 6,000, something like 6,000 firms have signed up to somehow cooperate and work together to provide PPE. So the numbers are phenomenal, and I'm quite anxious to hear some of the stories. So let's start out with a question just about those stories, actually, to Jan Westcott first, about some of the things that have happened in the alcohol industry, in the spirits industry, retooling to manufacture hand sanitizer. Like, take us through how some of the firms that you are familiar with got to those decisions to switch over, how hard it was, and you know, if this is actually you know, significant in terms of supply in the country.
I don't think it was that difficult in terms of getting into it. Most of what happened was people responding to local communities, local hospitals, care centers, EMS, police, all looking for hand sanitizer. So those in the community that were still out working made it. And in the hand sanitizer business, generally speaking, the main ingredient is alcohol. Most of them are between 60 and 80% alcohol. So you want a very pure alcohol. Obviously, the alcohol we make is people drink it, so it's high quality, it's for human consumption. So there was a natural fit. Companies like Harm Walker and Windsor responded to local requests from people in Windsor hospitals and those kinds of people, and got into it. So that was the stage one. And then many small distillers and small brewers and others, because they had alcohol, also got into the business. It wasn't easy. There are complications. Hand sanitizer is a regulated product under the Food and Drugs Act. You have to have approval from Health Canada. You have to have a formula. It has to be made to certain standards. And so Health Canada was really good. We worked with them in expediting the process to get those approvals. Same thing with the Canadian Revenue Agency. Alcohol, particularly 60 to 80% strength, would ordinarily attract excise tax. So CRA worked to streamline those processes to make sure that everybody was operating inside the rules. So step one was making hand sanitizer. Health Canada, though, came along and said, okay, that's terrific, all of this distributed stuff everywhere, but we need to sort of step that up. And since you're in the alcohol business, can you provide alcohol to some of the larger manufacturers that are in the business that can scale up quickly so you get production at scale? And I think originally Health Canada's expectation was that the industry would supply 500,000 liters, and we're up well over 1 million liters a month now to large hand sanitizer manufacturers. We're in the alcohol business. Tweaking the business to make this particular alcohol was not that difficult, but you have to denature it. You have to put something in it so that it's not drinkable. Finding those denaturants, getting them approved, working those things out, those were really where the challenges were.
So, and if we can turn a bit to Frank Bayliss, I mean, your company, I think, has a parallel story in the medical equipment zone. Can you tell us a bit about what your company has done to retool? How difficult was that, and you know, how you reached that decision about how you should adjust, and how significant the contribution is?
So ours is probably very different than Jan's. It's a major undertaking. First of all, to build a ventilator, it's a life support system. It supports life. And that means that it's very specialized, highly intricate, and it has to be tested. You can't just build it and send it out there. It has to be highly tested. So first thing we need to do is get a hold of these parts. And all over the world, people are looking for the same parts. So we have a supply chain issue that it's not just ourselves. When people heard about not being able to get masks from the United States, that also was applied to ventilator parts. So we've been working with people around the world to just acquire the parts, the specialized sensors and motors and that. Then we need to test it. So there's all kinds of test equipment we need to get, which again is just a global supply chain that we've been chasing down. People from the National Research Council have been helping us, saying there's one of those machines you need in this university, or there's one in this company. So we've had a tremendous challenge just to acquire the parts, acquire the test jigs, and acquire the test fixtures. And we're not there yet. We are still chasing all these things down.
So so how do you go about doing that? I mean, it sounds like we've heard the minister say that it's Wild West, and we've heard some pretty intense stories about equipment and parts and things being hijacked and or not showing up, and deliveries not coming through. I mean, how on earth do you go from you know, a domestic producer that's, you know, where everything's chugging along properly to, you know, having to you know, fight tooth and nail for basic materials?
What I would like to say is, you hear the negative part, but there's so many people around the world that are helping us. We're working with the group that manufactures cars in Vietnam, and they've taken on responsibility for the blower. That's what delivers air in the ventilator. We're working obviously with some Chinese manufacturers. There's a group in France that specializes in how you balance the motor, and they're helping us how to balance motors, which we have to buy from Germany. And then we have a group in Ireland that specializes on how do you test this once you've got it built, and they're helping us. And as another good news story, we have in our regular business our partners in Japan, and they up and sent us 5,000 masks for our workers, because they know that our workers are going to need these masks while they're working. So there's tremendous amount of people working together around the world on that, and all those countries and more are helping us, including the United States. Many people in the United States.
Okay, thanks. It's nice to hear about some goodwill in all of that coming forward. And on that note, let's turn to Jerry Dias, because you know, clearly the support of workforces throughout this whole transition is crucial. And I think my understanding is too also the source of many different ideas on how to transition auto manufacturing, or just, you know, other types of manufacturing into producing personal protective equipment and other things that are really needed. So can you fill us in a little bit in terms of the role of the unions or the role of the workforces in the switch over of manufacturing?
Well, first of all, let me deal with our members that are working in long-term care facilities, healthcare in general, transit, grocery stores. The one thing that they are incredibly concerned about is obviously the carnage that they're dealing with each and every day, but the lack of personal protective equipment. So as much as we are doing everything we can as a nation to source parts, we're doing everything we can to provide the goods. We are still dramatically undersupplied for those workers that need it the most. So our members in long-term care facilities, for example, are going to work. They're afraid every day. They're sick. And when they're sick, the residents are sick. So we have a much broader issue that we need to deal with when we get through this pandemic. Now, I look at a lot of our employers that have stepped up, the General Motors, the Fords, the Woodbridge Foams, the Hiram Walkers, the Autolives, Martin, I can walk right through the list. But ultimately, this is really coming together during this time period to pull together as a nation, but this is not a long-term business strategy for them. So the big question becomes, what do we do when we're finished? If anything, this pandemic showed us is how ill-prepared we are as a nation to take care of our own. And when I listen to Jan and I listen to Frank talk about global supply chains, that's what happens when you are completely self-reliant on others to provide the most basics of which to satisfy our individual needs. We can't even build a ventilator unless we connect with several other nations around the world. So I'm concerned about the basics. I'm concerned about the lack of masks, personal protective equipment. I am deeply concerned that as a nation, we may not learn a darn thing from this, and that we may end up with a SARS down the road, just like we dealt with years ago. And here we are again, depending on everybody else to provide us the goods. And the question, if we're being honest with each other, were we at the top of the food chain when it came to providing the personal protective equipment or the supplies? And the answer is no. So I'm concerned about where we're at today. I'm pleased with how everybody came to the pump. But I'm really concerned that as a nation, that what have we learned from it? And more importantly, what are we going to do about it?
I should have mentioned off the top that if the audience wants to ask questions, you can send them in the questions box, and we will get to them in as many as we can in a few minutes after I do a few more rounds here. So in the questions box, please. So just picking up on what Jerry said there, Mr. Asasi, there is obviously a lot of concern that our domestic system is so interdependent on countries that are dealing with their own pandemic issues right now, or just are not going to be that cooperative in the future. So your government has obviously tried to do quite a bit with your industrial strategy in terms of bringing companies together to create those domestic supply chains. How are they holding up? And how can we make sure that kind of domestic supply remains intact for as long as we need it?
Well, as you can imagine, from day one, the approach of our government has been all hands on deck, and we've had a whole of government approach to this. Now, looking at it from today's perspective, one can only marvel that it's only been 6 weeks since the Prime Minister and Mr. Baines announced a call to industry to join us in the fight against COVID. And what we have seen and what we've heard from the various participants is the extent to which our companies and our employees have been innovative to be responsive to the various needs that have arisen. Just to give you a sense of the scale of cooperation that we've seen between the Department of Innovation, Science and Industry and various companies across the country, so far in the last 6 weeks, we have been cooperating very, very closely with over 6,000 companies. And it really is a time to look at the incredible work that companies in various different sectors across this country have done in a short time span.
So, I mean, it does sound like, we keep hearing these stories, and it does sound, fantastic for a company to be able to find the flexibility and the ingenuity to flip over production like that. But I also keep hearing that people are not making money at this, and clearly that's not the first priority right now. But there is a long-term damage that's being felt there. So I'm wondering if we can hear from either Frank Baylis or Jan Westcott about how do you do the long term like this? I mean, this is my understanding is that this is a stopgap measure to help the country, but it's not a business venture for the long term.
I don't think in our particular case, I don't think it will be a business venture in the long term. We already supply alcohol, bulk alcohol, to a number of different sectors, pharmaceutical, cosmetics, very pure, very high quality. And so I think the business will revert. I do think that many of the smaller producers, the small distillers and some of the small brewers have now seen this as a business opportunity, as an extension of their regular business. And I do think some of them have said already they intend to stay in this for the long term. Whether they have the distribution or not, as I said earlier, you know, when Hiram Walker decided to make hand sanitizer, they were very fortunate in being able to turn to a number of Jerry's locals in the Windsor area to help them get it out to places. So you have to, there are many parts of the business. And as I said, we're supplying an ingredient to people that make this already. So I think as we see, clearly there's going to be a growth in the demand for hand sanitizer. I do think the conventional industry, seeing that, will step up and be able to satisfy that on a normal basis. So I think I do think that we'll be in this for longer than everybody believes, because I think that demand will be there until the more standard part of the industry takes over and produces it. But I think for us, unlike Frank's situation, where once you start making ventilators, there's so much that you've invested, you're going to be in that business for some period of time, satisfying that demand. Ours is a little bit different.
I'd say from our perspective, first thing when this COVID hit, obviously we want to protect our workers and we want to try and maintain full employment for them, which is very hard because we saw who could work from home. Keeping in mind that we make medical products that are used in heart surgeries, a lot of those surgeries were postponed, but they can only be postponed for so long, and they are now starting to come back online. So we have a duty to make those products. But what we did is we said we have to preserve our cash. So like many companies, we stopped spending here, we stopped spending there, anything we could do to preserve our cash. Then the government put out this challenge, and we said, look, we're more than willing to step up, but we have to buy all these parts, and we cannot risk our money there. So the government, when they gave us this contract, they gave us a down payment, which was critical for us to be able to go out and secure these parts all over the world, as Jerry said that we needed to do, because we didn't have the financial power. And if they didn't help us that way, we couldn't have done what we needed to do to ramp up so fast. So we did have the support there in that sense. Now, in this particular business that we're in, we're making a ventilator that's designed by a company called Medtronics. It's the largest medical device company in the world. And they put this out there and said, look, if someone wants to take up this challenge, here's the plans and everything, and we'll give you what we call permissive license. You can actually do this without breaking any of our patents and all that. And then they identified a couple of companies. One was ourselves, another one in Vietnam, and Foxconn, which makes the Apple phone and all that, and said, okay, we will work tightly with you. Why did they choose us? Because we have a side of our business, which is designing and manufacturing products for other companies. And we already had contracts with Medtronics, where we design and manufacture products for them that are sold under their name. And they said, okay, you have this kind of expertise. You know us, we know you. Can you help us? And can we work together to design these ventilators? And we took on specifically for Canada. So we don't know when we're done if they'll say to us, can you keep helping us? But that has been the path that we're working towards. So we do think that we will be in this business one way or another for quite a while now.
So, Mr. Sassy, what do you do more generally over the long term then? Okay, so you know, Mr. Bayliss will remain in this line of business over the long term, but I suspect most manufacturers will want to get back to their day job as soon as possible, where they can actually make some money. And then what do we do about the stockpiles and assuring that we have enough supplies on hand for round 2, or God forbid, round 3?
Well, I think it's several things are important to bear in mind. First of all, I think right now at this juncture, we're just focused on providing all those things that are so critical to our frontline health workers, to essential workers, and to Canadian families. So that has been the challenge we have focused on so far, whether it be in terms of procuring and producing face masks, face shields, hand sanitizers, ventilators, and scientific discoveries. But it's important that we remain nimble. I think everyone can tell you that we have remained focused. We've been working around the clock, and we've been very nimble in terms of our response. So it's important that we maintain our focus, and as needs arise, that we be there, and we partner with incredible Canadian companies that have really demonstrated day after day that they're very innovative, and they can retool and scale up and be there for Canadians across the country.
So, Jerry Dias, I'm interested in what you've taken so far from this crisis in terms of, I mean, you mentioned concerns, or well, pretty big concerns about frontline workers and essential workers not having proper equipment. Is that improving at all? I mean, we've got all these efforts going on to get the PPE produced. Is it getting to those workers? Is it getting to them fast enough? And then what do we do if we get a little bit of a breather here to make sure that they get they actually have safe working conditions for the next time around?
Well, first of all, it's not getting to them quick enough, especially the long-term care facilities. I'm on the phone with them each and every day, and people are petrified. So we need to stockpile, and we can't ever get caught in this type of a predicament again. But I will argue that our successive governments have dropped the ball for decades. We've lost about 560,000 manufacturing jobs in the last 15 years. And when you lose manufacturing jobs, you lose the ability to ramp up. So we really are a nation that is a crossroads. And I'm thinking as I'm listening to the panel about the debate that I have all the time with politicians, with people in Canada, when governments rightly will give money to the Bombardiers of the world, will give money to the auto industries of the world, and say that manufacturing jobs are important. And I argue till I'm blue in the face about those that are saying, no bailouts, no bailouts. No, here we are in a crisis. Who's building personal protective equipment? Bombardier in Thunder Bay, General Motors in Oshawa, Ford in Oakville, the auto parts plants, the manufacturing sector that has the ability to pivot. And that's why I can't get my head around people that just don't understand the basics of a vibrant economy and why it's so important. So the only issue becomes this is critical. We can never get caught without these essential supplies again, which means we're going to need to encourage people to stay in the business. General Motors is not going to build masks in the long term. They have the ability to, but they're not going to. Noro, Martin, Ria, Magna, Linamar, I can walk through the list. So who's in? Frank's in. Who else is in? We need to sit with them and put together a strategy that says, listen, we need you. So how do we put together a business case that keeps people employed, but more importantly, keeps us safe as a nation? Frank laid it out better than anybody, just talking from the inside of how you run a business. And we are so dependent on other nations to keep ourselves safe. And we can argue cost all day long. But when people are dying, cost can't be the predominant factor.
I just want to add to, if I could, I just want to underline what Jerry said. He's absolutely right. It's because we had this skill set and we had these factories and that, and to his point that Canadians could be looked after, because a lot of companies, as Ali had said, 6,000 could pivot and say, okay, we still exist in that. So there is strong arguments that Jerry's made there that I would agree with.
So maybe, Mr. Assassi, this is a question for you then. Like maybe if, you know, over in the medium to long term, this is something that the country absolutely needs, but there's no business case to be made for it. There is a government case from a public policy point of view that it has to be like, is this something that we take on in the future to make sure we have proper PPE for the long term, like some kind of shipbuilding type of strategy, you know, like we take a lesson from the defense industries, for example, where we make sure that we have our own domestic production and that it's made viable with government help?
Well, to Jerry's point, I think it's important that lessons be learned from the challenges that we've experienced over the course of the past several months. There's no doubt that we are incredibly indebted and grateful to the innovation of so many Canadian companies. But of course, at a time like this, once we can take our focus off, you know, some of the priorities, there are definitely going to be lessons to be learned. And much like Canadian companies that have pivoted, it's the job of the government to pivot as well and to make sure that we're not just there today, but we also have a good appreciation of the challenges on the horizon.
Heather, I just also like to mention, Spirits Canada came together with the cosmetics industry and with the Specialty Products Association to create the exchange. One of the things that that's going to do is actually bringing people into the hand sanitizer production business, some of whom weren't there before, but some other companies that were sort of peripheral to it have now seen the opportunity. And so I think coming out of this, you are going to see some structural changes. Most of what's gone on, as Frank has said, has been business to business. The exchange has worked very well. It's connected these people together. And so I do think that that's going to have a lasting impact on sort of how the hand sanitizer, potentially the disinfectant business, transforms over the next, say, 3 to 6 months to a year. So there are changes taking place that you are going to see these businesses continue in some of this kind of thing. Cosmetics companies that really didn't do hand sanitizer have now looked at this and said, yeah, this is something that we want to look at as a fundamental part of our business. So you are seeing those changes take place.
Yeah, I can't actually imagine a day where I'm going to choose lipstick over hand sanitizer for a very long time, to be honest, seriously, from a consumer point of view. Just to turn to the audience here for a moment or two, I have a message for Frank Bayliss. The Bayliss story is a fine example of working closely with global partners in difficult circumstances. Success will depend largely on the goodwill of our fine Canadian company that the company has with partners who can make or break this challenging initiative. Good luck, Frank.
Thank you.
There's a question here for Jan Westcott and Frank Bayliss. When you retooled, what did you do to retrain workers to work on these new products?
So in the beverage alcohol business, what we're doing is we're providing a slightly different type of alcohol. We're blending it with denaturants to be able to use outside of consumption purposes, or at least internal consumption. And mostly, I would say, the skill sets inside the distilleries are significant that they could do that quite easily. The challenge had been finding the other pieces Surprisingly, one of the biggest challenges we found is that we're large producers. When alcohol leaves plants, if it leaves it in bulk, it goes in a tanker truck. Many of the businesses are not able to take a tanker truck full of alcohol. They don't have the supplies, they don't have the storage, those kinds of things. So there are a lot of changes that are taking place to do that. But inside the distilleries and inside most of the certainly the larger breweries, those skills exist for sure.
So,
Mr. Bayliss?
Yeah, for ourselves, first of all, to acquire these workers, because we are busy making our own products, because we have the responsibilities to the patients that rely on that. We're part of a group called Ventilators for Canada, and there's a number of manufacturers in Southern Ontario, an important one, Danby, that makes consumer appliances, and that they're supplying us with a lot of the employees, the people that are going to do the actual assembly. Then what we did is we bag, board, and stole. Well, forget steel, but we bag and board to get units that existed out there that we could then take apart, put together, take apart, so that our engineers could learn the best ways to manufacture them. And we're now in the process of training these people. So you can see how, again, this has all come together. And the factory in Galway, Ireland, where these original systems are built, they are teaching us and giving us tours of virtual tours of their plant, how it works. Now, keep in mind, all this has to be done in a new way, the COVID way now. So in the past, obviously, employee safety is a primary objective for all employers, but suddenly your things that you would do this way because it's very efficient and safe, they're no longer safe. So we have to even though this is how you would normally build a ventilator, we can't build the ventilator that way in the COVID world because we can't have people coming together and all that. So that's added a whole new layer of complexity on how to build these devices, and we're working our way through that.
Jerry, maybe could you talk a little bit about that, like health and safety in the workplace? Because I think right now we're seeing premiers opening up some of the economies and pushing in a direction that some of the workforces are not particularly happy with, and worried about their health and safety of their workers. You know, how do you see that playing out, and is there enough cooperation out there to make sure that the, you know, the political imperative to get people back to work is actually done safely?
Well, the political imperative isn't going to do anybody any good, because at the end of the day, workers are going to make a decision based on what they think is in their best interest. People are nervous, and justifiably so. I mean, we have employers now in long-term care facilities that are okaying workers that have tested positive to come back to work. It's like having Colonel Sanders taking care of the chickens. Doesn't make any sense to me. But when you're dealing with a structure based on profit, such as the Cargills of the world, our food processing here in Canada, that's another game altogether. So here you have two major food processors, beef processors in Canada, Cargill and JBS, control 95% of beef processing. You've got over 900 workers have tested positive in Alberta, and they're reopening. I can assure you there will be more work refusals than you can shake a stick at, because people are afraid. So in that circumstance, Cargill didn't even reach out to the union. They just were dealing publicly saying, look, we've got all the medical health advisors on board, and we've spoken to everybody. Well, you better speak to the union, because the union are going to speak to your employees. So people are nervous, and justifiably so. So there's a major push in some circumstances to get people back to work. I'm not sure it's a great strategy. We can't blow up the economy, but we can't have more people dying, or you're going to end up with a much worse economic hit than you would have taken if you'd have played it smart the first time around.
Okay, I have a question for everybody here. When it comes to starting up the economy again, will those companies that have retooled, will they be in a better position to relaunch, or are they going to have to retool? And does that set them ahead, or does that kind of tie their hands a little bit in terms of relaunching? Who wants to take that one?
I'll go first. The companies I'm dealing with, this isn't their main business. So it's not as if GM is disrupting what they can do internally, or Ford or Woodbridge Foam or anybody. This is equipment that they brought in to get into the personal protective equipment in the sanitizer field. So they are doing this over and above. So will it have any sort of a negative impact to their transition back to their regular work? The answer is no.
So they can bounce back pretty quickly into their traditional niche, I guess.
People will go back to work on Monday, and there won't be a hiccup.
I would echo what Jerry's saying. This is over and above what we ordinarily do. Some companies have suspended or limited their regular business in order to supply alcohol. Many of the smaller distilleries across the country are making hand sanitizer, have scaled back a little bit on their production of their alcohol for consumption. So I think it won't be, it'll be a bit of a change, but it won't be a massive change to go back to what we're doing. And many companies that have agreed to do this, a number have said, yeah, we'll do it, and we're going to sell it at cost. We're not going to make money on it. So I think there will be some interest in getting back to the normal business cycle, but I don't think that's going to happen as quickly as some people believe.
From our perspective, I just add that we never stop doing what we do anyways, because we supply products that are needed for important surgeries. So this is above and beyond. In this case, we're working with other companies that are supplying us supervisors, supplying us with employees to manufacture. We rented new locales, which we're building out into. So there's that aspect. Now, one thing we did do is we moved a lot of our engineers, because there's a tremendous amount of engineering work from other projects that were distance projects, not ones that we needed in the next 6 months or a year, but we moved them into this ventilator program. That we're going to have to figure out when the dust settles. I don't have an answer how it'll all settle, but we have moved those people that will have to get back to the regular jobs at some point.
Well, what I would add to that is this is certainly, given all the contributions that are being made across the country, this is the largest mobilization of industry and the scientific community we have seen in peacetime. So obviously there are adjustments to be made. And our job really is to remain nimble and to facilitate the process as we emerge from this challenge.
So just to follow up on that, the sentiment of being nimble, there's a question here for you. Another question, is the government involved in providing materials that workers may need to return to work, like the masks and the gloves, et cetera? Is the government involved in that?
Absolutely. What we have done is we have focused, as I said at the outset, on being there for the procurement and the production of face masks, face shields, hand sanitizers, for kits and testing. So that's what we've been focused on over the course of the past 6 weeks, and you will see in the coming weeks a huge scale up in terms of the production by Canadian companies of every single one of these goods.
Yeah.
There's another question just on a little bit of a different subject here about foreign aid, I think, and helping in Africa. So the government was beginning to pay attention to trade with Africa. How does the pandemic alter that plan, and what will Canada do to combat COVID in Africa? And I guess I would add to that too, you know, when we are so desperate for supplies ourselves, how do we make sure that we are also taking care of that international need, which seems to be growing? I guess that's a question for the Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, we have been consistent throughout. We have recognized full well that this is a global pandemic, and we've maintained, you know, partnerships across the world and working in multilateral institutions. So this is certainly not a time to step back. We understand the scale of this and appreciate that it's in our best interest to be there for other countries as well.
I would add to that is that what we're seeing is obviously these, what I'll call first world countries, the countries that have a lot of money behind them and all that, they're racing out and they're going to get the first ones to get building things like ventilators now. But to Ali's point, our governments will have to start to think about once we get control of our situation, how do we help the less fortunate ones who don't have the money and weight and power that a country like Canada has? That then there is a certain responsibility we'll have, because this is a global pandemic that we need to, once we get our own house in order, how do we help other people?
So we can't do it concurrently. We have to get our own house in order first and then help them.
I would tell you that right now, what I see with respect to ventilators, these are very expensive pieces of medical equipment, and I know of many countries that are looking for them. And how do they get themselves positioned? Where do they buy them? Who takes care of them? All of those questions are being asked. But obviously, we're a G7 country. We're a wealthy country by global standards. So we have more heft than, say, some countries you mentioned, Africa, which are going to be hit and are being hit by the pandemic as well. So I'm just saying we have that responsibility. Our focus right now is obviously Canada, and that's we're a Canadian company focused on helping Canadians. But I think once we get our house in order, that we can start to look at those helping others less fortunate than us.
Okay, I'm going to try to squeeze in one last question here. So it's about outsourcing, and it's directed to whoever wants to answer it. Why has Canada outsourced so much medical production to other countries like China, which are so unreliable, and are we going to rethink outsourcing?
Well, I'll argue that probably one of the better free trade deals we've signed in decades were NAFTA, where we actually started to talk about workers. It wasn't a preoccupation on the lowest common denominator about work, and we source things cheaper. It was the first trade deal that we actually talked about workers in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. It's just going to take quite a while before things change. But there's always been this historical right-wing push for the lowest, the cheapest, and that we need it to be competitive, so we need to chase the lowest common denominator. Boy, that's really proved well for us today. So I think there's a much broader discussion, because look, think about it. I mean, Harper couldn't bargain himself out of a wet paper bag, I would argue. The free trade deal that we signed with Korea was a total disaster. The TPP, another mess. And if you look at the trade agreements, we went from a nation 25 years ago that had a trade surplus in manufacturing to a $20 billion deficit today. So that's because we've taken our eye off the ball, and that's because of philosophical differences, a fundamental philosophical difference that says, look, we're just going to outsource our economy. And I think people are looking at things a little differently today. I think we need to be a little more self-sufficient, and this pandemic, I think, has shown that.
I think it's going to be a question of balance, Heather. In our particular business, and I think in a number of Jerry's members in the companies they work for, we sell a lot of our goods outside of Canada. So in Canada, 75% of what the distillers make is exported. That's an important market for us.
Yep.
I think so. It's that balance. On some things we have let it go too far, perhaps, and we need to bring some of that back. But you know, we enjoy a very high standard of living for 35 million people, and part of that has been our success in being traders and exporters. I think you know, as we go through time, some of these trade agreements are going to be a little more robust, perhaps like NAFTA, but the fact that we can sell our goods around the world means that we're going to be in that global trading environment. As I said, I think it's a question of balance. We have to make sure that we're satisfying our global customers while also making sure that we look after Canada. And where is that balance going to settle out?
No, he's right. Trade has to be a two-way street. We sell you something, and you know, it's got to go back and forth. We buy, you buy. It's not like that in the automobile industry. I can assure you of that. We import so much more than we export, and we get hammered on so many different industries. So you're right, we're an export nation, and that can never change. We just got to use our head a little bit as we're moving forward.
A mantra for the ages. I'm going to hand it over to Sandra Pupatelli here to wrap things up.
I really appreciate, Heather, you coming forward to moderate our session for us. Great representation from business. Jan and Frank, I think it's notable, Ali, that you would give us the time today with everything you've got swirling around in your world of government right now, and we very much appreciate the heavy lifting that you're doing. I just want to say, Jerry, thank you. Take care of your workers, because we know that you're hard pressed and you're out there on the front line. To everybody who is watching today, I hope you found this of interest, and note that the Pearson Center, a centrist think tank, is continuing this kind of work. Please get on our mailing list so we can let you know when we've got more great sessions pending with great panelists like you've seen here today. Thanks for participating to all our great panelists and moderator. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take good care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.